What's the deal with Aquaman?
What's the deal with decaf?
What's the deal with lampshade? What's the deal with
fascism?
Ooh.
Yeah. So I wrote quite a bit on this, but so fascism is a far-right ideology rooted in authoritarianism and nationalism. And I feel the need to emphasize that a second time. Fascism is a far-right ideology. It is not, nor can it ever be, a left-wing ideology. Anyone who claims that the left are the real fascists are lying or do not know what fascism is. Fascism also sometimes has racially based prejudices as well, and often promotes a sense of superiority among those who fit into some set of prescribed norms. Generally, white, heterosexual, male, and Christian.
Merca.
There are other ideologies that mirror similar ideas of superiority for different groups, but at this time, those are not considered the mainstream for fascism.
Nazism.
I'm not really into etymology, but I think it's interesting to note that the word fascist is connected to or derived from the word fasces, which is a bundle of rods. And fascists will often use the symbol of a bundle of rods around an axe, or a fascio litorio, which is supposed to symbolize strength through unity, as if to say a single rod is easily broken while the bundle is difficult to break.
What if you just unite all the rods into one big strong rod?
You could make it even a further connection to like a bunch of cocks.
What if you just combine them into one big strong rod?
Okay, you can put the rods into the Kuiper belt and hope that they gravitationally bind together in a soft contact binary or multi-ary, and then send a really expensive space probe to go fucking look at it.
There you go. You could.
To tell it to go fuck itself.
It's like a butt, and that male scientists just want to penetrate that butt. That's what they want to do.
Sure. So fascism actually takes a few different forms, but is characterized an ideology with a few similarities. First,
rods, dicks, butts, and
they are
Kuiper belt.
always anti-liberal and anti-communist, and actually they are often conservatism. Though many current iterations of fascist ideology that we see in North America and in many parts of Europe include a kind of adherence to what they view as traditional Western culture.
America.
Fascism is also authoritarian in nature and nationalistic, with a well-regulated and protectionist attitude towards the economy.
America.
Though they are very pro-private industry, it is very anti-globalization ideology, which basically means fascists are cool with people owning businesses within their country or state and think most things should be privatized, but they don't. But they want to regulate them, and they don't want outside interference.
America.
Another thing that most versions of fascism have in common is that they are quite fond of symbols and charismatic leaders, that they can unite a group around and promote a positive view of violence, and they promote a positive view of violence and masculinity.
America.
Not to put too specific a name on it, but you can see why the fascists in the alt-right would follow a guy like Richard Spencer, who is decent-looking, well-built, and articulate.
Douchebag.
Yes. Fascists hate weakness. They see themselves as the strong ones, and they view practically every other political ideology as the weak ones. They are also obsessed with the decline of society and consider themselves to be the only ones able to repair it, which they will do by eliminating undesirables, whether by banishment or extermination. They view undesirables as impure, which can mean any number of things depending on which group of fascists we're talking about. Many consider members of the LGBTQ community or people with disabilities to be impure and think of them as disposable or degenerates.
That sounds familiar, like something that happened in like the 40s?
Yeah, something like that.
Sorry, can I also say something? You mentioned that fascists tend to have a certain idea of masculinity. They also have a specific idea of femininity. Women as mothers, women as, like there's very
strict roles.
Gender roles. Yeah. Sorry.
No, for sure. There are a small number of fascist regimes that have taken power in a few countries since it became a political ideology in the late 19th century. Italy was fascist under Mussolini. Germany was fascist under Hitler. Some historians consider Napoleon III to have been the first fascist, though it wasn't called that at the time. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil is a fascist who is in power right now.
Scary-ass motherfucker.
Most references to fascism refer to Italy in the early 20th century, as that's where the name first appeared.
Is Duterte a fascist?
Duterte.
The Philippines guy?
I don't think so.
More of a dictator, isn't he?
Is he a dictator?
To be a fascist, you need a specific ideology. You can't just be like looking for power and abusing power. It can't be just that.
Yeah.
There's an ideology associated with it. Like, I wouldn't say Trump is a fascist because he's not smart enough to have an ideology. He's more of a... He's an opportunist.
He exhibits fascist-like tendencies, though.
Like authoritarian tendencies.
Yeah, and nationalistic.
But he doesn't have any real political ideology.
I don't think he's really
Christmas message was like threatening.
I think it's just a show.
Well, maybe.
I think he's
like
pure
criminals.
capitalist.
He's a kleptocracy. He's interested in what he can get for himself.
Yeah.
It's a selfishocracy, whatever that is. Like,
economically speaking, fascists are corporatists, which means they organize their society by corporate groups such as agriculture, labor, military, scientific, or other associations based on common interests. The idea is that when each group performs its designated function, society will run properly. Not entirely unlike, say, a syndicalist structure of society that some anarchists adhere to, except for the coercive nature of corporatism versus the voluntary nature of syndicalism. The Italian fascist regime first created a ministry of corporations that organized the Italian economy into 22 sectoral corporations. They banned workers' strikes and lockouts, and in 1927 created the Charter of Labor, which established workers' rights and duties and created labor tribunals to arbitrate employer-employee disputes. In practice, the sectoral corporations had no independence and were actually controlled by the fascist regime.
That was very efficient.
Yeah. Employee organizations were rarely led by employees themselves, but instead by appointed fascist party members. This created a system in which employees had essentially no say in the conditions under which they labored. But I'm talking about fascism now because it seems to be pretty popular in the mainstream right now. Well, at least in mainstream conservatism or the right wing.
Yeah, it's really hard to see a difference in the States.
I'm just going to cover a little bit of a video by ContraPoints that she put out in September of 2017, and then I'm going to talk about where modern fascism seems to have gone since that video. In Contra's video, she lays out three main beliefs of today's fascists. The first is that people of European heritage constitute a biological, cultural, and political unity known as the white race, which is also often referred to as Western culture. Just as an aside, we now often see people in Canada referring to Canadian values or in the U.S. as American values. This is another dog whistle to this white race unity, although it often includes religious aspect as well, also known as Christian values. Number two, Jews are masterminding the destruction of the white race through multiculturalism and non-white immigration. Fascists often refer to this as the white genocide or ethnic replacement. This fits into the idea of the decline of society that I mentioned earlier, and it's why you hear them chanting slogans like "You will not replace us" and "Blood and soil." And number three is the only way to save the white race is to establish a white homeland or ethno-state from which non-whites and degenerates can be purged. This is also fundamentally informed by their narrative about the decline of society and their view that they are strong enough to fix it as long as they expel the weak. So Contra has done a number of videos debunking these three core beliefs of fascists, but yet fascism persists. In her video Decrypting the Alt-Right, she points out that society under late-stage capitalism kind of sucks, and it leaves a space in the sense of identity the white men are seeking for that fascism can sneak into. White dudes are actually facing a number of challenges in modern society. I think the line from Fight Club actually says it pretty well when it points out that we were promised fame, fortune, and decadence as long as we worked hard. And now that we find that not only are we worse off than we were before, we have to compete with more than just other white dudes. We also have to compete with women, people of color, people with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ community. We were told by TV, movies, and marketing departments that we were entitled to be at the top of the pyramid, and we found out that we are not entitled to that, and we won't even come close to reaching the top. I blame the rich, but for many men it's easier to blame those who don't have power and are starting to gain equal footing. Thus, the rise of fascism and the resurgence of hostility to social progress in the mainstream. Who are the modern fascists? If you look online, you might see some people talking about race realism or race science. You might find people comparing slaves to drug dealers and espousing the value of having a whites-only nation. If you go into the boards on 4chan or 8chan, you will find them in there pretending they're sharing Nazi memes ironically, or giving pointers to each other and keeping a low profile until the time is right. In 2017, they marched on the city of Charlottesville. They are the alt-right, the Proud Boys, the KKK. You'll find some in red hats chanting "Build the Wall," and I think it's fair to say that in Canada, some of them are wearing yellow vests. Jair Bolsonaro is currently in charge of Brazil and plans to wipe out the indigenous peoples in the region so he can sell off Brazil's valuable rainforests. I'm currently quite concerned with the rise of fascism, and while they're taking heavy blows the last year or so, they keep coming back, and as long as the U.S. has a president that won't straight up disavow them, then they likely won't ever be gone here. I recently watched a video called A Night in the Garden, which showed 20,000 Americans in New York City in the year 1939. They were wearing swastikas and performing Nazi salutes and talking in much the same way we see Donald Trump and his ilk talking now. Talking about an ethnic group that isn't white, as though they were the root of all trouble, espousing the idea of American values. Fascism was always a part of American culture and, by extension, Canadian culture. I don't know how to defeat it, but the key in my mind is to keep an eye on them and never let them hide. If you see a fascist, let them know that you see them. If they know we're watching, then they can't build power unchecked.
Punch them in the face.
Also, vote for anyone who isn't a conservative or right-winger, because at this point, I think they've all been compromised. I wouldn't have called Harper a fascist, but I most certainly will call this new crop of conservative politicians we're seeing in Canada at least fascist-friendly.
I think Harper was fascist light.
Maybe.
Right at the end of his reign, he was just
you're right.
making arbitrary decisions.
But again, that's authoritarian, right? Like that's having to do with how he administers power, not...
That's why I said fascist light.
Right.
It's not fascist, but...
Yeah. All right.
It's better than crying.
So, let's move on to feedback.
Wait. Can I say something?
You bet.
Also, I love the TV show Man in the High Castle. So if you want to see kind of like a fictionalized, like what fascism. So the idea of the show is that is an alternative history where the Nazis won World War II, and so it's set in like the 60s, and like 2/3, like the eastern 2/3 of the country is controlled by the Nazis, the western third is controlled by the Japanese. Yeah. And so if you want to see what fascism might manifest as, and just how the characters act and with the assumptions they make and how they interact with each other, you can kind of get the idea of that.
It's an awesome, really interesting show.
Yeah. I have like 3 episodes to watch in the last season, but yeah, it's awesome.
I'm only like halfway through the first season.
Yeah,
so
it's good. The book's not so good.
No?
Yeah, it's slow.
The show's a little
Philip
slow
K.
too,
Dick is the show is like fast compared to the novel.
Right.
Like anyways. Philip K. Dick is not my favorite.
Philip K. Dick had a lot of really interesting ideas.
Yes, but as a writer, I just find him banal. Anyways,
I think that's pretty fair.